off your engine!
Roy Hines says, how can I burn off the water vapors in my wife's car? She only drives it like 5 minutes to work and back. And I noticed there's a little bit of condensation when I take the oil cap off the engine. How long would I need to drive it to stop that? You really need to get an operating temperature at speed. So take it out at least once a week for 20, 30 minutes at highway speed, 65, 70, whatever it is, continuous speed. You get that hot and the wind and everything's going, that is going to burn off any of the water vapor that can build up inside the oil. With her only going 5 minutes a day driving it, yeah, it's not a good thing for all kinds of reasons. Your engine can carbon up because it's not getting the operating temperature and going at higher speeds. My wife used to be a school teacher, and she used to have a commute of like 3.5 miles to school and back. And she had a nice Toyota Camry station wagon, and it ran okay. But one time, we decided Easter we were going to go to San Antonio, to the Alamo, right? Well, the speed limit back in those days was 75 miles an hour. So I went 80 the whole way. We got back, and she said, oh, my car, it idles so smooth now. I said, yeah, that's because we took it on a highway and burned all the carbon out of the engine, because it's like a 3.5-hour trip to San Antonio, and you're going 75 miles an hour most of the way, and it will clean stuff out and get rid of the water that builds up, because you burn gasoline, it's hydrogen and carbon, and in Earth's atmosphere, when it's burned, one of the side effects is it creates water vapor, and it goes somewhere, and unless you drive the car hard enough, it won't boil all that water vapor out. That's why if you start a car first thing in the morning, you'll often see little droplets of water coming out of the back of the exhaust. That's because it's created water and it's blowing it out. It will vaporize over a certain period of time, but take it at least 20, 30 minutes once a week on a highway. That'll help get rid of it all. For you hybrid fans, Jeep's is coming out with the first hybrid 4-wheel drive models that have 31 miles of electric range. At least they claim it has that many miles of electric range. Now realize that one of them, the Jeep Renegade, they're not really Jeeps. They're basically 4-wheel drive Fiat 500Xs. They have nothing to do with real Jeeps. They're not made in the United States, and they're basically Fiat 500s with that tiny, and I mean tiny little engine. It's a 1.3-liter turbocharged engine. And let me tell you, from my experience of working on cars my whole life, those little bitty engines blow up all the time. They were bad enough just running themselves. But when you throw a turbocharger on that little thing, they don't last long. Use our thinking caps here. Okay, you got an Italian Fiat 500, right? Turbocharge it, making it less reliable. Then adding hybrid, an electric battery pack. What are Italians known for in the mechanical world by mechanics? As having horrendous electrical systems. Now they've added this complex hybrid electrical system. I can't wait to see how those clunkers fall apart before their time. I mean, to this day, they still can't make a dependable, normal vehicle. And like I said, they're not really Jeeps. The Jeep Renegades, the base model, isn't even all-wheel drive. It's not even rear-wheel drive like a conventional Jeep. It's front-wheel drive because it's a Fiat 500. It's not a Jeep. It has nothing to do with Jeep. I just find it hilarious. Now they're jumping on the bandwagon that you can drive it in electric mode so many miles. I challenge Fiat to send one of these things to Scotty and let me try it out in the real world. They never will, because they don't like me, because I tell the truth about how junky their vehicles are. If they ever did, I would love, and I would honestly road test it, see how many miles the thing actually went with the air conditioning turned on. If they wanted to give me one for a couple of years, if the engine would actually hold up when you drove it hard. They're offering hybrids now. My advice would be, that'd be one hybrid that I'd stay a long way away from if I valued my money. Wolf Dragon 75 says, my '05 Pontiac Vibe is having starting issues. I replaced the battery, had the starter rebuilt, and cleaned the ground contacts, but it still rolls over only when it wants to. I can hear the fuel pump kick in when I turn the key. There's only really two things that would go wrong in those from my experience with those. You know, they're basically Toyota Matrixes, Pontiac sold. Either you got a wiring loose connection or a dirty connection between the battery and the starter, and it can be the power wires or the ground wires. Or, more often, Whoever rebuilt your starter did a crappy job. I see that all the time. That's why I tell people, when you get a starter, you're better off buying a new one than a rebuilt one. Guys that rebuild them often do a crappy job. Now, there used to be a guy down the street from me that rebuilt alternators and starters, and he actually did. He took them apart, and he'd put it on a lathe, and he'd remachine the ends so that it was smooth again. He'd put new brushes in, new bearings, new Bendix drive. Everything was new, right? Guys nowadays, they might look at it, oh, the brushes are worn, put new brushes, and that's it, and that's not a total rebuild. I think I just did a crappy job. I'd say just go to like AutoZone or something, buy one of their starters, put it on, and if the problem stops, take the starter that he rebuilt back to the guy who rebuilt it and just say, look, you screwed me over. You didn't do it right. Just give me my money back, and I'll never come here again because you don't know what you're doing. When I was young, guys used to rebuild them all the time. Now, they're getting to be so inexpensive, you're better off just buying a new one than trying to rebuild the stupid thing. I stopped rebuilding them years ago. Bob F. says I got an '06 RAV4 that burns oil. Years ago, when it had 80,000 miles, I took it to Toyota, and they said that they put the new piston rings in it to solve the problem. Now, it has 165,000 miles, and guess what? It's burning oil again. If I complain to Toyota, they're not going to do anything. What should I do? Should I get rid of it? 165,000 miles is a lot of miles. But I got customers with those, and they'll burn a quart of oil like that. And they still drive them for another 2, 3, 4 years. As long as they run okay, the only thing you have to do is add oil as it burns and change the spark plugs as they clog up with a little bit of oil burning. What the heck? You know, with that kind of mileage on, and it's 15 years old, it's not worth much anyway. So you might as well drive it. What the heck? Drive it. As long as you can drive it, who cares, you know? You could call Toyota, but odds are they're going to say, well, we already did that once, we're not going to do it again. Well, obviously, they didn't do it right in the first place. Because, see, if the piston rings are worn, that also warns the cylinders. And so they didn't replace your block. They would have to replace the whole engine. So they put piston rings, but on a worn engine, then they're going to wear out eventually, too, because the block is more worn inside. That was kind of a half-assed fix when it came to it. They should have replaced the engines, but they're just putting rings in, and what the heck? It's 165,000. Just keep driving. Now, if they'll put new ones in, again, great, but I doubt if they will. Just keep driving it, and they add oil as it burns, and as long as it runs, what the heck? It's found money. You've had it all those years, and it still runs. David V. says, a year ago, I got an '04 Grand Marquis with 37,000 miles from the person whose father passed away. It runs great, but sometimes the transmission takes 2 to 3 seconds to go from park to reverse and move hot or cold. All the other gear changes work fine. I replaced the filter and fluid, the problem's still there. It's got 52,000 miles. Should I be concerned? Not really. It's just old age. And a lot of cars will get like that backwards is the normal where you're going. So when you put it in reverse, it might take a few seconds for it to grab and back up. You put it in drive and it automatically goes forward. What the heck? You know what I do? When you're driving it, I would just drive it most of the time and park it so you don't have to back up and you don't wear it anymore. Because I've seen them go years that way and still work perfectly fine. And the less you use reverse, the longer it's going to last. So if you park with your front sticking out so you can get out back in first, then you won't have as much of a problem. I see it. I mean, you only got 52,000 miles on. Odds are it's still going to go a long time. It's just that it's so old and it's sat for so long. If I were you, you might drain 1 quart out and put in a quart of Lucas transmission fix. And sometimes then it'll stop doing that. I've done that to those things, and if it does, great. Just take 1 quart of your fluid out, put a quart of the Lucas automatic slip fix in, and see if it helps. And if it does, great, you know? It's great stuff in those old cars. It worked quite well. Vroom says, I'm looking for another car after my Volvo crapped out on me the other day. I was looking at used Toyota Yaris's from 1718. I do believe they're Mazda. I'm wondering if they're dependable and if they're a good buy. Those are decent little crappy cars. They don't ride that great. They're kind of bumpy. They get good gas mileage. And they can last a while. You know, they don't last as long as... Hey, you were driving a Volvo. They ride okay. If I were you, why don't you look at used Corollas? They're much better than the Yaris's. They last 2 to 3 times as long. You'll pay a little bit more, but if you get a car and it lasts you, 10, 15, 20 years, 400,000 miles, do you really care that you have to pay a little bit extra? And you'd probably be a lot happier with the Corolla than you would a Yaris. Go road test a Yaris and road test a Corolla, and you'll probably find the Corolla so much more fun to drive. You'll spend the extra and get the Corolla instead of the Yaris. But if you want to go cheap and you don't care about a crappy ride in a car that's made a bit poorer than the Corollas, go ahead and get a Yaris. Realize they're not making them anymore. They're pulling out of the United States market. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.